Thanks for everybody for showing up. It really just warms my heart. We're going to find out that actually has a real influence on my stress level. So even though I'm feeling stressed right now, because I'm about to give this presentation, it's kind of an excited stress. I can use the energy of this stress to actually give a better presentation. And what I'll be teaching you guys, you can use the energy of the stress in your life also to help yourself heal in different ways. So, this topic is an extremely important topic to understand because it really can flip you from fight and flight into rest and natural capacity to heal through this technique, through what I'm going to teach you today. So, and lastly, hats off for you for taking that proactive approach. I really think that when you show up, when you learn, when you invest in your health, it sends a very powerful message to your body about healing and wholeness, and you can profoundly influence your life. And so I really am excited. I'm excited because I keep on learning and, adding more information to the seminars and different practical advice. So let's get us started with big picture here. So I suspect that you can see the screen now. And so I've been reading this book called Cured recently by Jeffrey Redinger. In fact, we're going to interview him tonight in our Spirituality and Cancer podcast. So I'm reading his book right now. And so Dr. Redinger is a psychiatrist that works at Harvard. He also has a master's in divinity at Princeton Theological College. And, he was called to start to investigate spontaneous remission, people who were diagnosed with different conditions, including incurable cancer. And over the last 17 years, he's really delved deep into how that happens, trying to look at from a scientific perspective using his theological mind. And it's really a very powerful book filled with wisdom. And so I'm hoping to integrate his teaching along with the teachings of Kelly Turner, of radical remissions, and just what I've learned over the last 30 years as an oncologist. What is it you can do to facilitate that kind of deepest healing, get the kind of home run result? So that's what I'm hoping to kind of cover today. But what did Jeffrey Redinger say? He said that the 4 pillars of health were healing your immune system, and that's super important. And it's one kind of holographic picture, right? So when you really take care of yourself, when you empower yourself at the levels of body, mind, and spirit, it interacts in a way that can have a kind of exponential or super additive effect. But he said healing your immune system, healing your nutrition was what we talked about last time. And then today we're going to talk about healing your stress response, right? How do we relate to stress? How do we work with our stress? We're all going to have stresses. How do we relate with it? And ultimately healing your identity is a much bigger picture. So I'm drawing on that teaching of the literature, the kind of science, and then a practicality around that. So we're thinking about your goals and your life. How does working with stress, reframing stress, enhancing your life via stress work for you, and what goals might you have? Obviously, when you can settle your stress reaction into kind of a healthy zone, you really have a profound influence on the physical health and potentially the cancer health and so on. Again, releasing that the healing capacity within your body, right? We all have that capacity. And so by coming into the healthy zone, you can definitely maximize your chance of recovery. We feel better emotionally. We're going to learn today that when we're feeling super stressed, it's really hard to feel good, right? The emotional body takes over and we don't perceive the world in a positive way. So when we work with our stress, we can feel better emotionally, come back home to ourselves. You definitely can think more clearly. So the stress brain is one that does not think clearly. Your wise and compassionate brain will allow you to think more clearly and to function better, which is what life is about as well. When we have a healthy relationship with stress, we're able to connect with others, which I suspect is the kind of most important thing that we have in our lives, is this, our relationships. And lastly, when you come back home and you're in your wise and compassionate brain, it will allow you to actually have those, the aha moments, the insights, the realizations of the depth and beauty of your character, both kind of a psychological perspective and from a deep spiritual perspective, right? So you can hone yourself, you begin to resonate with something bigger than yourself when you can kind of put yourself in that space. So whatever is best for you, however you want to set your mind, set your intention, set your psyche, working with stress, super important. I'm also putting this within the context of what I call complete cancer care, because I believe that getting the best from the medical system, as well as empowering yourself at levels of body, mind, and spirit, give you the best chance of recovery. And, you know, it's your happier, best self when you kind of do the integrative oncology approach. So that I'm trying to stay within that frame, even though you may decide to go beyond that. Okay, so take home points from today's lecture. I want you to understand that you can actually build resilience. You can build stress hardiness by really taking care of yourself, by connecting with others. You have the capacity to make a profound influence on your health. So this is the first step. The second thing is that I do not want you to see stress as the enemy. I taught that for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years before I kind of woke up to, oh, there's a bigger picture here, and that we can actually draw on stress within our lives, see it as enhancing, and actually our brain function. We think more clearly when we see stress as a positive element within our lives. So I'm hoping that you can get this mind shift, this change in perception, and this will profoundly influence your health ultimately, right? So by reframing stress, you can increase your healing potential, and that will really improve your health and happiness. So you have that capacity. There's this possibility for you. Okay, so how are we going to do this? First of all, we're going to talk about stress. We're going to talk about the practical ways to build resilience. And then there's a kind of 4 levels of teaching, between what you do when you're suddenly stressed and flustered, to practicing resetting your stressometer, reframing stress, and ultimately going into what's causing the issues, the kind of perceptive source of this. Please chat your questions at any point. I'm happy to chat both on film, and then afterwards we can also have a more open conversation off camera. So this is the book that really changed my thinking. So Kelly McGonigal's a psychology professor at Stanford. She's just, I mean, she gave a TED talk called something like The Upside of Stress or something like that, 10 million views. I highly recommend it. Essentially, there's a huge science around stress as not being all negative. And so I'm really drawing on her teachings. And also Dr. Rick Hanson, psychologist, psychotherapist. And really, he's a very kind of scientific, hard-nosed guy talking Buddha's brain. Hardwiring Happiness is also a very powerful book. It talks about the fact that we can rewire our brain, called neuroplasticity. By practicing those states of mind, you get stronger and stronger and stronger at being in those states of mind. So I'm drawing actually on his slides a fair amount. And so I think this, the first one is, one of his slides is around this idea is like, how did we evolve, and how did that influence our kind of stress approach? And so if you think about it, the organisms got more and more complex, to the point where 600 million years ago, there's a nervous system that kind of sensed. There was a sensory component that sent a message to the motor component, and that was the start of our nervous system. And then the nervous system, and I use the word nervous because the nervous system is nervous, became more and more complex. And even 2.5 million years ago, it was sophisticated enough for our ancestors to start to be using tools, but they only had brains 1/3 the size of our brains. So our brains are much more complex. And what happened there through Homo sapiens and so on is we became much more social. In fact, the last line there is that we lived in tribes for tens of thousands of years. And so we're very social beings. And the tribes that were prosperous and able to push their genes down to the next generations we're the successful ones, and that we're the product of that. So we're very social, and we have to recognize that. For all of you who have blue, green, or hazel eyes, you are mutants. Because they were none of those people from till about 6,000 years ago. And I guess one individual in the kind of Denmark area got that mutation, and that person and their progeny were very popular. And so we continue to evolve over time. So think of your brain as being built in like stories of a house. So you start with the kind of first level structure, which is the reptilian brain, the fight or flight side of it, autonomic nervous system. And then through evolution, the next story that was built was the limbic system, the paleomammalian brain. And that had more to do with the reward system. You're going to see that in a second. And then the last part, which is really captures us as human beings, is neomammalian, and then very much the frontal lobe there. So we have to work with that brain structure, right? So we're the Stone Age brains in the modern world, and how do we work with it? How do we work with what's between your ears right now? So that maps those three levels, and I guess it is a kind of simplification. Those three levels do map to avoiding harm. So the reptilian brain is really about withdrawing from danger or aggression. It trumps all others. It really is a very powerful system, and it's an important system. And then you got the limbic system, which is a kind of a more approach system. So we're going after what's most important, essentially food and mating, pleasure type of things. But it's a very, very rich, emotional, sustained pursuit, complex system. And again, it has its place. It's what gets you off the couch and doing things and coming and watching this seminar, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the system. And then the last one, which is the kind of frontal lobe, more advanced human part of it, is really our best selves, right? It's about bonding, connection, empathy, cooperation, love, ethics. It's where you want your brain to be firing from. That's your best self there. And the bottom line is that all systems draw on the other systems for their own means, right? When we run into an embarrassing situation, it actually primes or activates our pain center, for instance. So the systems are using themselves. So how does this work in terms of stress? So classically, stress was defined as a condition in which an individual perceives the demands of a situation as exceeding their resources. What's the key word in that whole sentence? It's perceives, right? So we create a virtual reality, and we put ourselves up against whether we can take care of the situation, whether we can address the threat or the question in mind. So this is kind of classic stress teaching. The stressor is the situation. It's the traffic jam. It's the, late for an appointment. It's that kind of out there thing that happens. And then we have a perception. And then stress, by definition, is our reaction to what's happened out there. And a reaction takes on physical manifestations, which we'll go over shortly, but there's also an emotional response, because it's the irritable stress brain that then has the feelings, and also that influences how we think. So just remember that when I'm using stress, I'm often using it as the reaction and not the external environment. Our stress reaction is our internal process. So there's many pathways to stress. So, to get that kind of brain stem going, that feels that, that kind of scared, frustrated, angry feeling. How do we experience stress? There's lots of different ways that the brain can send signals to give you that kind of feeling. So one of them is a real threat, right? You're walking down the street and a car comes over the curb at you. You will automatically jump away. A stress reaction will take over your physiology and kind of save you from that moment. So that's a huge stress reaction, that moment. But we humans made a huge evolutionary step forward when we began to think about the possibilities of the future and trying to plan what we might do in that situation. And the greater our imagination was, the greater that we could stress ourselves, right? So thinking about what might happen in an upcoming medical appointment, or thinking about getting the test results. So even though it hasn't happened, you project it into the future, you create a scenario, a hypothesis, and it gives you that kind of scared feeling. So even though you're well in this moment. The third level, and I just find this interesting. I think, why was I nervous coming into the podcast today? Why am I nervous going up on stage and giving a talk, even though, I know the information and the audience is on my side and all that stuff? Well, there's a social norms, and think about it from the kind of tribal perspective. If you were ostracized within the tribal unit, that was as good as a death sentence. So we're very attuned to how other people perceive us. And if we feel like we're either, in an argument that's threatening, or if we embarrass ourselves, or, some threat of being ostracized, that gives us a stress reaction as well. So again, normal human physiology, evolution, we don't need to judge that. That's just how we're wired. We need to work with the truth. And lastly, just thinking about the future and what might happen in the future, because we have a nervous system forever trying to figure out what's going to happen next and trying to plan for it. And so that's part of our evolution as well. We're kind of nervous, anxious characters, generally speaking, right? This is the point where you need to kind of get back into your frontal lobe and see a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, it's not worth, creating all those catastrophes in your mind. It's actually worth staying home in the here and now when you're well and letting go. Yes, you're taking the appropriate action, but you're not kind of exaggerating or catastrophizing. So again, that's where the frontal lobe is sending signals to make yourself anxious in the lower parts of your brain. Okay, so the first level teaching is to understand that we all have a unique stress reaction. We all get ourselves upset in different ways, and it has what I would call a stress signal or stress signature. So I want you to imagine, do kind of a visualization of the last time that you were feeling really stressed, upset, anxious, nervous, scared, overwhelmed. I'm sorry to put you there, but just for a moment, take yourself back into that situation and kind of give yourself a little bit of a stress reaction right now. Okay, so now imagine that you can press the pause button on the video. Come back into yourself now and do like a body scan. What are the symptoms that you're feeling, or what were the symptoms within your body that you were feeling at the time of the stress reaction? And I can get you guys to chat that right now, but I'll just enumerate some of the things that could be there. So a lot of people would describe a pounding heart, right? That kind of pounding, or the feeling like the blood pressure or the arteries bulging in your neck. Could be a change in breathing. Oftentimes, because essentially what's happening is the cortisol and adrenaline are getting ready for a fight and flight, right? So you've come to the space of upset, anxious feeling. And so you get these deeper breaths in order to get more oxygen into your system. And so the breathing can get exaggerating, big breaths. Sometimes it can get stuck up high, like taking a breath in and then not being able to breathe at all. And then you feel like you can't breathe. So that could be a breathing change. You could have a dry mouth or a dry throat. Again, is part of that reaction. You could be experiencing a headache or muscle tension. So any type of muscle tension, kind of shoulders, neck, back. You can get the jitters. It reminded me of my watching hockey. My son's hockey for so many years. I even get kind of the jitters going into hockey arena because I've been so programmed now to feel nervous going to watch a hockey game. Your gut can feel kind of acidity, like a gastritis or kind of butterflies, feeling that you don't want to eat, and maybe a sense of nausea. Could be that you have to feel like you're going to have to go to the bathroom, could have sweaty palms. So I'm describing many, many possible physical symptoms there, because it may just be one physical symptom that gives you the cue to say, oh, I've worked myself up here. And I remember at a weekend retreat, it was a woman was saying, my gut doesn't feel quite right. That was the only thing that she could say that could describe that was the physical symptom. Okay, so you should understand your physical reaction. The next thing is to kind of recognize an emotional reaction. And so it could be the kind of classic fear, anxiety, overwhelm, could be like an anger, seeing red, like you want to throw your computer screen out the window type of flash. It could be that you dissociate and completely numb off of your emotional reaction, right? So again, or you could just feel irritable. Oh, it's like, I'm trying to point you towards all this, because what you want to be able to do is use your mindfulness, or the kind of sense of watching yourself kind of in the day-to-day, in the moment to moment, just watching yourself and going, oh, geez, I'm irritable right now. Or, oh, I'm really feeling flustered or angry, So it's like, that could be the cue for you. What happens to your thinking is the next question. So most people, when they're stressed, they can't think as clearly, because that's not the part of the brain that allows them, allows you to use your logic and your kind of rational mind. It's more of a feeling, and then it becomes a bit blurry or foggy, is the typical thinking around the stress reaction. But it could be that you kind of see a pattern within your stress. It could be like a hamster on a wheel. It's like almost like a circular sentence or two could be the thinking. It could become very concrete, very narrow, could be very loud, right? So those are all how the thinking changes. And lastly, to be able to be aware of your own thoughts, right? It's almost like you're watching yourself think. And when you're stressed, so think of it this way. Imagine that there was a magical computer program which could type out your thoughts 24/7 for a week. And at the end of the week, you go back and you look at the transcript, and you can just see the words and sentences. What would be the words and sentences that you would know would tell you that you were feeling stressed at that point in time, right? So, so for instance, sometimes the finger gets pointed outwards at other people. That guy's such an idiot, or, that person, I don't like that person, or like it's some type of kind of judgmental finger pointing out. Sometimes the finger gets pointed inwards, going like, I'm such an idiot, or I'm such a loser, or I'm not worth it, or whatever it is. Could be the word or sentence. For me, if I'm swearing in my mind, I know that I'm having a stress reaction. It's like, oh, geez, I'm pretty upset here. I've got myself stressed out, right? So, and you see right at the top of this list here, what are your triggers, right? So we all have certain buttons that push us towards feeling stressed at times. And it's not like you're going to, go away from this seminar saying you're never going to have another stress reaction. It's just to recognize that we're human, that we all have our vulnerabilities. Certain triggers, replicate what we felt in previous situations when there was a greater threat. And so we recognize that. And the earlier that you can recognize that you're having a stress reaction, the easier it is to kind of settle that down. So this is the first piece around it, is like mindfulness, so incredibly important. You're watching without judgment, just the truth of the situation. It's giving you information that can really make a difference in how you cope with the circumstance. So because we don't want to get ourselves overly wound up, we don't want to go beyond what's helpful, then we can actually settle ourselves down. The earlier, the easier. Okay, so if you want to, you can actually stand up while doing this. In fact, it's a nice little break to kind of stretch your legs in the middle of all this. And you can put your hand on your lower abdomen. So again, it's kind of It's like being kind to yourself, loving yourself here. So what happens is if you can recognize that you're feeling stressed, the first thing you need to do is to stop the catastrophizing mind, because it's your thoughts that are causing you to ramp yourself up too much. This is a too much situation. So how do you do that? Imagine that you're in the midst of the situation, and 99% of the time you don't have to snatch the child from underneath the car, so you can actually do this. You press the pause button on the situation, right? And then to let go of the catastrophizing mind, you put your brain in a different space. It's called interoception, which is the capacity to watch your body, the physical sensations of your body. So start doing that right now. What does it feel like right now to be in your body? You don't have to think it, you just have to experience it. Experience the physicality of your body right now. You don't have to change anything. Right? So as soon as you've done that, you're starting to bump yourself up into your higher centers. Now I want you to take 4 slow breaths and be very mindful. Watch it carefully. Be curious about the act of breathing. Now let's tweak that to doing a longer, slower, smoother out breath. Breathing out, nice and slow. And you may even notice that you're starting to develop a relaxation response by simply slowing down your breath and being very curious of your breathing. You're sending now a signal to your vagus nerve to say that you're safe. It's going up into your brain. Your brain is actually able to come back home to the wise and compassionate part. And then you can talk to yourself. I can handle this. I've been through difficult situations before. Let's take one step at a time. Let's remember what's most important. Right? So, okay, you can sit down again. So just to repeat the teaching, recognize when you've wound yourself up too much. Typically, you've got some time to kind of settle down, press the pause button, come back to your body. The physicality of your body is very helpful at this point. And then you do the slow breaths, and then you talk to yourself. So then that wise part of yourself, the kind of higher part of yourself, then can talk yourself through how you want to be in this world. Okay. The issue is if you allow yourself to kind of be flustered all the time, holding that kind of tension and anxiety and walking through the world like everything's a problem, and you can get very, very good at being in this space. And that releases the chemicals into your body, and it really affects everything, including your immune function, including your capacity for, your healing capacity. Fatigue damages brain. And I'm not trying to stress you out during this stress talk. It's just that's the kind of classic teaching. And the issue is there's a whole bunch of resilience and homeostasis within the body help you get back home to your wise and compassionate self. Right? So, and then that's the other part of this, is to recognize that sometimes we do hold ourselves in that state for a long period of time, and we kind of run to kind of a burnout within our body. And that's the point where you really, really need to slow down and take care of yourself even more, right? And so it's the mindfulness piece of what happens when you're physically burnt out, what happens to the thinking, it becomes negative, the emotions, et cetera, kind of the burnout feeling. So that's what we're guarding against from a very practical perspective. We're trying to get you back home to your best self that's functioning at its highest value, because there is potential issue here. Okay, so that's the rest of the talk essentially. how do you build your resilience? How do you become more stress hardy? And it starts out by resetting your stressometer, right? By practicing a relaxation technique. I'm going to get into that shortly. But the first thing is to understand that our brains can either be trapped in this kind of high level stress, or we can come back home to the lower line, the solid line there. We're going to run into stressful situations, right? The stress is going to come up. If we can settle ourselves down, we get back to the baseline, maybe below, we're going to run into the next situation. And so you got that kind of much lower, smoother curve on the bottom. Life is going to offer you the same challenges. That's the truth. But you might as well be in that space where your best self is deciding how to respond to it and not kind of get trapped into high gear, because that has an influence on your health, right? So this is the way that you can be, by practice. And you're not going to do it perfectly. None of us are. Just that's how it is. We're going to get ourselves worked up sometimes, but we can definitely settle ourselves down sometimes. Okay, I wanted to explain that you do have the capacity to develop your stress hardiness by working with the physicality of your brain, so your evolutionary part of your brain. And the point is that the brain flips back and forth between being in a stressed, irritable state. We flip into this throughout the day. And at other times we're our best self, the wise, compassionate, because the brain's going kind of back and forth between the two. When your frontal lobe is active, then you're less prone to be triggered by stress, and you're much quicker to recover back into the more relaxed, positive state, right? So we want to enhance or promote frontal lobe activity. I want to show you the hand model of the brain here. So you can see down into the wrist. At the bottom is the spinal cord, and then the brain stem is more like the reptilian brain. And then as you get up into the thumb, it's called the limbic system. The hippocampus allows you kind of memories, and it's the positive stuff. It's the learning part of the brain. The amygdala is the alarm bell system that bypasses the rational mind. And ultimately, your fingers, if you curl them over, and that creates the position of the brain on the right side, is the neocortex. So just to show you visually, right? So the thumb is the limbic system. It's the approach system. I call it, just to kind of a generalization, it's the irritable stress brain, right? And then we have our frontal lobe that goes over top, and that's really the kind of side view of the brain. This is the kind of front view of the brain. So this is the frontal lobe. And interestingly, the frontal lobe overlies the limbic system, right? So when your frontal lobe is firing, it's sending signals back to the stressed, irritable brain to say, you're okay. Life is safe right now. Be calm, right? So you want to keep your frontal lobe engaged. You don't want to flip your lid, right? You don't want to, stress. You want to come back home as much as possible. You want to stay there as much as possible, because that's the happier, more positive view. And we flip back and forth lots of different ways throughout the day. So stress is one of them that flips us up into this position. Okay. All right, so then how do we empower the frontal lobes of our brain to be the one that's dominating, the one that's, more there often? First thing, think about it. If you're tired, we're often much more irritable, right? So when we're fatigued, in fact, when we're fatigued and tired, we're much more likely to eat unnecessarily. We feel hungry. We're trying to kind of wake ourselves up, right? So again, there's a lot of self-care things. So when you are more rested, when you take care of yourself, when you have appropriate nap, and you do good sleep hygiene, trying to set up the circumstances in which you get a better sleep, you're more likely to be your best self and less likely to be stressed by the slings and arrows of the world. So sleep is one of them. I can't emphasize exercise enough. Exercise is one of the ways of just by itself as an anti-stress mechanism. When we exercise, it releases the molecules of joy. It actually sends molecules up to your brain, and it settles down the stress system, and it enhances the kind of happiness, pleasure, social system. When we exercise, it's the best version of ourselves, and we're much more likely to reach out to others. It's the easiest way to get yourself out of depression, by exercising. And we had a whole kind of session on the exercise part of it. Releases the happy hormones. It's also, for me, it's like the meta message. When you get out there, and whether it's like dancing in your apartment, or you're going for a power walk, or however it is that you kind of get your heart rate up, you're setting that meta message to your body, to your soul, around, I want to get better, I want to get stronger, right? So really exercise, and it's really a pro-social activity. You can release, I read this recently, you can release the kind of runner's high by doing intense exercise. So not everybody's going to be able to do that. B, by listening to music while you exercise, or C, by doing exercise in a social situation, right? Exercising with other people. And that has the extra benefit of all those, the pro-social motivational systems get primed when you actually exercise. Okay, so sleep, exercise, obviously diet comes into this as well. So when our blood sugars drop down low, so if you eat the sugary stuff, you get a big spike, and then the insulin kicks in, it brings the glucose into the cell, and it can often bottom out. So sugar levels get too low, and then the brain shuts down the frontal lobe, just because the frontal lobe takes more calories per minute, and puts you back into the stressed, irritable brain. And that's the part of yourself that just like wants to get the cookie or the food, or it's the irritable part of yourself. So you want a low glycemic diet, which means that the sugar levels stay kind of a more constant rate. You're getting the complex carbohydrates, you're getting the proteins and the fats with each meal. And so your sugar levels stay at a nice humming, beautiful level. And that helps you stay in your frontal lobe, and it's your best self as well. Obviously, I mean, the whole huge other explanation around diet in terms of plant-based, anti-inflammatory, taking care of your gut and the microbiome, because all that stuff, your gut has 100 billion nerve cells around it. That's sending signals up to your brain. So you have a nervous system in your gut, the nervous system around your heart, and you have the nervous system that's in your skull, right? And it's one unit. So you really want to take care of your gut, take care of your diet, and that really will decrease the stress levels. Lastly, this is very important as well, as practicing a relaxation technique. And so typically I think about, meditation or body scan, something in which you're practicing the skill of paying attention to something specifically. So a relaxation technique is not going into your bathtub, although you could practice meditation in your bathtub. It's not necessarily going for a walk in the woods, although that's extremely healthy as well. These are all other good things, but we're talking about a particular skill in which you actually practice coming back home. You get your chattering mind starts to chatter, and then you kind of come back home to yourself again. And I'm just maybe describe my own meditation process. In fact, I'm going to show you my heart rate variability monitor. So this is a little device. It hooks onto my ear, and then I plug the other end into my smartphone, and it measures my heart rate variability, which is how much variance is in my heartbeat breath to breath. So for instance, when I breathe in, the heart rate actually goes up, goes a little bit faster. When I breathe out, the heart rate actually slows down again. And the more kind of variation that I can get in this heart rate, the better it is. And so I use this device because it measures something that measures the vagal nerve, and the vagal nerve is the kind of parasympathetic side of the nervous system, the relaxation side of the nervous system. And it gives me a little kind of readout. And so that's the biofeedback part of it. And that's a summary of my session from this morning. You can see I'm in the green zone on the bottom part of the screen. I'm in the green zone the majority of the time. In fact, I was in the green zone 99% and had average coherence to 5.2. While I'm meditating, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but in order to get yourself more and more in the relaxed mode and have a better heart rate variability, two things they suggest. One is the longer, slower, smoother out breath, right? So I told you about that one, but also to visualize the energy around your heart. And the third one is to bring to mind a really joyful, positive, or loving feeling. And so for me, I think about hugging my wife. And when I do that, my heart rate variability goes up. And so the vagal nerve is also hooked into the kind of social system as well as the kind of relaxation system. So that's all to say that there's some newer technology that allows us to strengthen that vagal nerve through this kind of social connection. And when we do that, when we practice a meditation, we're more likely to reach out to others, we're more likely to connect from a social perspective. And that kind of has an upward spiral of relaxation, parasympathetic, or the relaxation response, and social positivity. The better version of yourself comes out when you practice this. I want to tell you about just kind of a relaxation technique of my own, what I did before I did this heart rate variability. So when I was practicing a meditation technique, I've been meditating for the last 20 years. I would sit down on the mat and I bring my attention to my breath. I've been doing that 15, 20 minutes every morning for many years now. And try to do that longer, slower, smoother out breath. And within about 3 seconds of starting my meditation, I'm starting to chatter. Like I'm starting to plan what I need to do that day. I'm giving the podcast on stress. Am I going to be able to integrate this? Have a podcast tonight? What's going to happen? And then I recognize that I'm thinking, and I would bring my attention back to my breathing again. Within about 3 or 4 seconds of that, I'm thinking about what happened yesterday. I was kind of standoffish. Maybe I shouldn't have been so, I'm not such a nice person. And then at some point in time, I'd recognize, oh, I'm thinking about that. And I bring my attention back. And it wouldn't be long after that, I'd be thinking about something else and I'd bring my attention back. And so this has been a very similar process for the last 20 years, a very similar process. Now, while I'm practicing that, most times I do kind of get that sense of, like at some point, it's like, I get a relaxation response. I'm feeling much more calm. I don't worry so much about the chattering mind. I can see there's a benefit. That's not the kind of goal of meditation, just get better and better and better at that. It's actually to become better friends with yourself. And also, it's the muscle of returning, right? So I'm chattering and then I remember, oh, wait a second, I'm not supposed to be thinking about what I'm doing today or what happened yesterday. I'm supposed to be focusing on my breath. So it's the muscle of coming back home. That gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that builds the mindfulness that is very helpful in your day-to-day life. They also know that when you practice meditation, it actually thickens the left prefrontal lobe. And that has all the benefits that we've been talking about in terms of the relaxation part of your nervous system, being able to calm down, emotional regulation, right? Remember I said that this is sending signals back. So the emotions can get regulated. You can watch the emotions without getting triggered or pulled off by the emotions. You definitely get better at paying attention, right? Because you want to pay attention to what's happening in order to make good decisions and so on. And lastly, this taps you into the more positive aspect of yourself. It's the balance between the right frontal lobe and the left frontal lobe that overall gives you the mood, but also taps you into your creative process, the logical, the empathy, the caring, your best self, right? When you practice meditation, that thickens the frontal lobe quite literally, and you become the better version of yourself more often. That's the kind of stress hardiness of all this. So it's very important to practice a relaxation technique in which you are asked to keep coming back, whether explicit or implicit, right? So it could be yoga where you're doing this. You could do other activities in which you're practicing that. And I know that on the days that I meditate, I'm my better self. Like I'm better able to listen to that next person. I recognized a few years into meditation that I was actually meditating throughout the day and that I'd be talking with somebody. And then I would start thinking about what I needed to do after work. And I'd recognize I'm not actually even listening to this person. I bring my attention back to the conversation again, right? So it was making me a better physician. I was more effective at doing one thing at a time and doing it well. Okay, so that's what I call, by practicing a relaxation technique, you're resetting your stressometer, right? So instead of kind of running here all the time and being anxious all the time, you can actually be in a more calm, centered, clear thinking state. Still the same challenges, right? The world is still going to offer you exactly what's going to offer you. But when you're in that more clear thinking state, you make a better decision about how you want to respond to the world, right? And you just feel better. And you're just less likely to be pulled this way and that and distracted from what you value most. Okay, so back to the presentation. Super important practice, and that's also scientifically proven to help with stress, generally speaking. All right. The last one is like, you know, there's also this kind of sense of, from a bigger perspective, and I'm thinking about kind of long-term stress, is balancing your life, sending that kind of loving signal to yourself to say, how is it that I want to spend my life? And sometimes I need some self-care in order to kind of keep myself in balance so I can enjoy my world and enjoy my relationships more. So on the left picture, it might be something where you're, spending some quiet time by yourself, doing an activity that feeds your soul, nourishes your soul, right? Getting outside, breathing in the air, looking at the trees and the sky. It's like, that's good for me. That gets me back to myself. And sometimes it could just be the kind of the social things you like, hanging out with your grandkids, for instance. And that could, feed your soul in some way or form. So think about it. It's like the sword of loving kindness cuts through the unnecessary stuff into allowing you the space to feed yourself. Because when you're in that space, you're your better self, you heal more easily, and allows you to fulfill what's most important for you. Now, lastly, this is an interesting one, and it's kind of funny. Like, look at that picture. Like, where are their masks? Like looking at old films. Like, why isn't everybody wearing a mask scenario? And also, what I like about this picture, it's, don't think about it just about the younger woman helping the older woman. It's the older woman who has been gracious and kind enough to accept the help, right? It goes both ways. And it doesn't have to be carrying groceries for somebody. It can be the kind of kindness that you express, in your day-to-day conversations. It doesn't have to be like the great acts of service. It used to be that kind of feeling like you want the other person to be happy and you're looking for opportunities to connect with them, right? And that has also been proven to really improve mood and stress levels, is to try to look for those opportunities. Okay. All right. So far, we've been working on the bottom right-hand part of the curve here. So this is what they call a performance stress curve. Obviously, as for the first while, if you're too lackadaisical, you need to up your stress level in order to perform better. There's a comfort zone there, but you actually peak when you're beyond your comfort zone, when you're in that little bit of an edge state, you're a little bit of a stress state. And so far, we've been really focusing on this right lower part of the curve, right? Recognizing when you're like really overwhelmed, really flustered, really angry, really upset. How do you get yourself back up the curve? First idea is that you're not going to get back to like peak state. It's okay. It's as long as you make some improvement, that's better. As long as you come back more to yourself, that's better. You're not going to get into Zen state. You're not going to become perfectly calm all the time. It's just not likely to happen for us humans. The next part of the presentation really is talking about how do you get yourself up to the upper curve, right? How is it you can still have the kind of stress and challenge of the situation, but your performance actually maintained during those elements. And that's the new science of stress, and that's why I'm quite happy to be offering this. So what is your relationship? So it starts out with a kind of perception, right? You're watching yourself. You watch yourself like your best friend. Do you like that person? Or you're watching your stress reaction. Do you like your stress reaction? What's your relationship with your stress reaction? When you're feeling stressed, do you say to yourself, feeling like this is toxic, this is bad, I need to manage this or reduce this? Does it come out as like, my life is toxic, this is too much, I'm not doing this right, I'm inadequate, Rob gave this talk and I'm not getting myself back up the curve very well, am I, right? So is that your relationship when you see yourself running into the stressful situations? Or can we transition now to this idea that stress should be accepted, utilized, and even embraced, right? When I'm feeling anxious, that means that something important that's like, here's a good opportunity to learn, right? So that's a whole different feeling to the common stresses that we're all going to face in life. Okay, so here's the science around it. And the reason I'm very excited about this part of the presentation is that if you can integrate this, if you can understand this and make a mindset shift, it would actually profoundly help you for the rest of your life. It only takes the one learning, the one idea, the one session. If you can integrate this, this would be very, very helpful for you. Okay. First of all, we asked ourselves the question, do you believe that stress is harmful to your health? Like all the long-term stuff that I've been talking about and so on. Yes or no? Well, this is very interesting. So this was a study of 30,000 Americans followed for 8 years. And they asked two questions, like how much stress have you been experiencing the last year? And do you believe that stress is harmful to your health? So it's just two questions of these guys. If they felt stressed, and they watched them for 8 years, right? If they felt stressed, the mortality rate was increased by 30%, right? So if 100 of them died in 8 years, then it was like 130%, 130 of them would have died when they felt stressed. So it's that type of increase. But they only had an increased risk of death if they felt that stress was harmful to their health. In fact, the people who felt that stress was not harmful to their health, they had the greatest chance of being alive at 8 years afterwards, regardless of their stress levels. And I kind of think of it like a general walking through, World War II, bombs landing all around him, and him not really worrying about it. It's like, I'm going to die, or I'm not going to die. I'm not stressed about this. This kind of stress resilient character. So that's the first thing. So if you believe stress is harmful to you, you're right. If you believe stress is not harmful to you, you're right. So that mind shift by itself. The next one is they did a poll of 125,000 people, and they asked the question, did you experience a great deal of stress yesterday? So 2006, essentially adults, 121 countries, and they looked at the stress index because they thought that most stressed countries would have the greatest problems with health, et cetera, et cetera. So the average was 33%. Went from 5% in one of the African nations up to 71% in, I think it was Singapore. The USA was, 43%. And Canada would have been very similar to the 43%. They found exactly opposite. The higher the stress levels, the greater on average was the well-being of the country, the life expectancy, health satisfaction. Economically, they were more productive, and they had a greater sense of community, right? So higher stress levels correlated with positive correlates of health and happiness. Yes, we can say when people on average say, yes, I'm experiencing high levels of stress, that does get correlated with more anger, more depression, more sadness, more worry. That's true. But it's also correlated with more joy, love, and laughter. When we're more stressed at times, we can laugh more often. Interesting, people who say, yes, I've had a lot of stress, they can also correlate generally with their health and satisfaction. The statement, I feel my life is meaningful, is most closely associated with feeling stressed, right? So it's like when you're stressed, you're feeling like you're engaged in the world, right? So you're having this kind of relationship of wanting, caring, and that adds more meaning for you, right? So when we're starting to now reframe stress as something that's actually helpful. So the way I define it, the way Kelly McGonigal defines it is, so stress is what occurs when something important is at stake, a stressful situation, right? So that can be whether it's, a difficulty with a relationship or an angry boss or medical situation or, something more frivolous like getting caught in a traffic jam. So something important's at stake, and that's an internal experience, right? So how do we work with that? So one of the ideas is, can we embrace the stress? So this was a study, people about give a 5-minute persuasive speech, and then they were going to figure out if they were more likely to be hired or not. And the people in the study were randomly assigned to say, I'm calm, like trying to calm themselves down, or they would say to themselves, I'm excited, going into the speech, like trying to deny the stress or to try to engage and harness the stress. And what they found with those who were asked to say, I'm excited, they were perceived kind of in blinded fashion to be more confident, rated as more persuasive, confident, etc. So reframing stress. This is a very, very interesting study. So something called the social stress test. There's lots of different variations of it. But essentially, usually kind of get a person to do like a speech of some way or form, and then you mock them in some way or form. And for this one, it was Columbia business students that were trying to give a 5-minute persuasive speech. It was for their for a grading, etc. And so they were brought into the studio, and there were bright lights and a camera, and then they had 6 judges, and so it was all set up to make it look very authentic. What they didn't know was that the judges were taught to mock them in some way or form, and it could be like crossing arms, yawning, looking at their watch, different ways. They could be whispering, snickering. But in this situation, the judges actually stopped the students kind of halfway through their speech and would say stuff like, that's a terrible example. Think of something else, or your body language is all wrong. Kind of stand up straight. If every single person who goes through the social stress test, it's anxiety provoking. It's like we are wired to, want to get along with people who are kind of judging us, so to speak. So it is provocative environment. That's just the kind of the measurement tool. Now is the actual study part of it. Half of the students received a video that basically said, stress is bad for you. You can't perform as well as stress. You need to avoid stress. Half the students received a 3-minute video before they did this that said, there's a new science to stress, that you can use the stress reaction to learn. If you feel your heart is pounding, that's giving you more energy in your body. If you're feeling short of breath, you're getting more oxygen to your brain. You can actually use the stress reaction to give a better speech. So it's a half and half, again, a randomized study between, stress is bad and stress is enhancing. The ones who got the stress is enhancing video rated themselves as more confident, more determined, more excited. They were judged to be better employees on blinded assessment of the videos. And interestingly, there's actually a chemical change within their brain. So DHEA is a neurosteroid. In the rest of the body, coming from the neck down, you release DHEA in response to physical exercise. So if you lift some weights, DHA comes out, it's a precursor to testosterone, the muscles get stronger, right? So it's kind of helping you build your muscles. In your brain, it's a neurosteroid that actually allows you to learn during stressful situations, to remember and learn, get stronger during stressful situations. So the students that had a stress is enhancing video had more DHA in their saliva samples, and therefore more DHA in their brains. So they were able to perform better just because they believed that stress was enhancing. It also, DHEA opens up the blood vessels. So it's like an anti-inflammatory effect and allows the heart to function better, less likely to have heart attack and so on. So believing stress is not harmful, is actually enhancing, helps you in that side as well. So when we have that feeling, it's a very similar profile to when we feel joy or when we need to draw on our own courage. It kind of opens us up and allows us to perform better because we are releasing DHEA and not believing stress is harmful. Okay, so then the next kind of neurochemical I want to point you to is actually oxytocin. Oxytocin is the cuddle hormone. Mothers release it during breastfeeding. When we cuddle with each other, when we hug with each other, we have a sexual experience with each other, it all releases kind of oxytocin. Oxytocin is also released during a stress reaction. This is one of those chemicals that gets released and allows our body to respond or get stronger and protects us. It allows us to have greater empathy and insight. It makes us more social. So this is a really interesting one as well, is that when we're feeling stressed, something within us says, I need my tribe, right? So it drives that pro-social reaching out. I think of it also like a man cold. So the guys, the big, strong football type guys, they get the cold and oh, I feel so tired. I need to be taken care of, that type of thing. I think it's oxytocin that actually makes them feel that they need their tribe at that point, gives that tend and befriend response. So from your perspective, what I want you to take away from this is, when you're feeling stressed, look for opportunities to either offer help or to receive help. And that releases oxytocin, which is protective, kind of settles down inflammation, opens up the heart, allows the heart cells to actually recover and get stronger. So it's almost like an antidote to stress within the whole body's system. So feeling stressed, reach out, connect, ask for help, give help. Okay, so there are other chemicals that are released during a stress reaction. Oxytocin is the social caregiving system that we just went over, but there's the dopamine system, which allows you to actually act. So there's more sense of optimism, dampens the fear. You're less likely to freeze when you're feeling the stress in that system. And then the other one that I really like is the serotonin system, which to me, it's like being able to see the truth, right? So you get more perception, more intuitive, you understanding what's happening in the situation, you're clear thinking, right? So again, you can tap into these hormonal systems when you're feeling stressed. And then the last one is just this idea that peak performance, look at the professional athletes, like the musicians, even like a neurosurgeon. Do they feel nervous? Yes, they do feel nervous and stressed and so on, but they also feel a sense of excitement and energized, enthusiastic. It's like the Olympic athletes. What will they say? I'm really excited to go to the Olympics. Yes, I'm feeling stressed, but I feel excited to go to the Olympics. Okay, so other interventions to reframe your stress. So I am calm versus I excited. We went over that one. So you want to, when you're feeling that sense of anxiety, it's like, I'm feeling excited in this circumstance, right? As opposed to trying to withdraw. And the other one is always, always, always have the opportunity to say that I can get stronger from this. I can learn from this. I can grow from this. In the corporate world, this is the intervention from Crum and team. So we acknowledge it, right? Look at the truth, know the sensations, start with reality, start afresh, right here, right now. And then don't try to fight it off. Accept it. This is something important at stake. Why does it matter? What is my priority? How can I be my best self in the circumstance? And then we use the energy of the stress reaction. Okay, let's do a little just stretching the spot. We're about, I don't know, 5-7 minutes away from finishing presentation. Even if you're watching this on video, it's nice to have a little stretch. Okay, I want to the last thing I want to talk about is this idea that we live in this virtual reality, that we create rules as to when we should be stressed and not stressed. And we can reframe it based on CBT or cognitive therapy, essentially that our thoughts are influencing our emotions. If we reframe our thoughts from, for instance, I'm no good, to I have inherent beauty and strength, we can decrease depression. So that's an example of that one. So you can change the way you think. You can change your beliefs. You can see yourself differently, the life, the world, others. And ultimately, this will change how you feel. And you can come in much more positive, centered, clear thinking state. So I just wanted to go through a couple of reframes just from a kind of generic to see that oftentimes we're causing ourselves a stress reaction unnecessarily because of the way we look at the world here. So this is the classic 3-column technique. Situation is just the raw data. And then the first step is we often place a judgment or an automated thought or a distressing thought on an already difficult situation. And I'm not minimizing that there aren't difficult situations. I'm just saying that we're adding more distress to that unnecessarily. If you can see yourself thinking, then you can work the second column and you work your way through that. And ultimately, you want to come back home to that wise and compassionate part of your brain that can acknowledge sense of kindness or self-compassion, can look from a different perspective, and ultimately be encouraging of oneself. Be your best, coach or grandmother, and so on. So this is the kind of 2 generics. Usually, it's something around other people. That's like our greatest stress. That person did something. That president didn't, get out of office, and it's stressing me. Right? So you can fill in a situation that caused you stress because someone did something that you didn't like. So that's the situation. It's just true. They did it. And then you add extra stress in the situation by saying what they did is bad. You're labeling it as completely bad. Therefore, that person is bad, or you're kind of labeling them there. And ultimately, the core belief that you need to reframe as extremely helpful is people should not act this way, right? And yes, you can have it from a practical perspective. It would be better if society was such that people did act in a better way, but people should not act this way, and you're fighting against the reality of the situation. You work through the central column. What emotions fall this way of thinking? Well, it's a frustration, anger causes, number 2, a stress reaction. It's not helpful. Yes, you have the information about what they did and what's appropriate, but to be pointing the finger and being very judgmental, et cetera, is not helpful. And then the exaggeration, people should not act this way. Well, people do act this way. So therefore, there is some sense of exaggeration. Ultimately, you're working towards the 3rd column. You're acknowledging, seeing a bigger perspective, and being encouraging of yourself. And for instance, in this situation, so that person shouldn't have done this thing is, this is disappointing or frustrating, whatever emotional response you have, so that you accept that that's how I'm feeling. It doesn't help for me to get myself all worked up and upset about their bad behavior. They're doing the best that they can. I act in inappropriate ways sometimes too. And so therefore you can have some compassion for that person to recognize that they're like you. And yes, you don't want to accept bad behavior, and you need to potentially act appropriately and so on. But to have some compassion for the other person can definitely decrease your stress from that situation. Okay, so then the next big reframing is around life itself, right? So you're running into a difficult situation. I'm not minimizing the difficulties of having a cancer diagnosis. I'm just saying that that's the kind of the raw data. And then you're placing extra unnecessary stress and judgment and difficulty on the way you're labeling that situation, right? And so I'm trying to get the extra 5% unnecessary suffering out of the situation. So you could be saying, this is all bad. I can't handle this. And ultimately, the core belief is life should not be this way. This should not have happened, is the way to kind of think of that. So what emotions fall this way of thinking, right? So it's kind of the judgment, the frustration, the anger, disappointment, that gives a body reaction. I suggest that it doesn't help to think that way. You can still look at the reality of the situation. Life should not be this way. Well, life did happen that way. Therefore, there is some type of extra exaggeration. Again, acknowledge, be kind, see a bigger perspective if you can, do the appropriate things. So the reframe could be, this is really difficult, this is stressful. Doesn't help for me to judge what's already happened. I can take action, right? You're listening to the seminar, you're getting the best care possible. I can make the best of this. I can choose to love. I can choose to connect with other people regardless. Okay. So I'm not trying to minimize the difficulties that people go through here. So we don't have to label good stress, good situations, bad situations. We start out, the remarkable cancer survivor starts out with, this is the truth of the situation. How is it that I can bring my best self into this? How is it that I can maximize my chance of recovery? How is it that I can love and connect with other people? So I don't have to judge the stresses. And that's why I believe setting that intention is so important. Decide how you want to be in this world, regardless of your situation. What do you hope for yourself? And then do that consciously, deliberately, and really make a difference in your life. And that can have a profound influence in your health. All right, so healingandcancer.org. I'm going to stop share there and open it up. Maybe Layla, was there any question that you saw coming through? People can chat their questions. Yeah, I think that's our mechanism here.
Yeah, we have a few questions. So here's one. So somebody said that they miss stress. They feel that at home. They miss work-related stress. So how do you strike a happy medium when you have to spend extended periods of time at home?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, is this kind of sense of meaning, because when we're engaged in the world, whether it's through work or through connections with family or doing some other type of project, that can be stressful, but it also is associated quite clearly with meaning as well. And so I'd say be creative, find ways that you can reach out and do those things from home, right? So you can volunteer, you can chat with people you haven't chatted with, find out what's happening in their lives. Maybe there's an opportunity to help them or connect with them, or work on a project together. It's tough. Just recognize it's tough. It's tough to be at home. It's tough to be part of COVID. And let's all pray for a vaccine so that we can get out and connect with people more often.
Absolutely. Another question. Do we need to draw a distinction between acute stress, such as before a meeting or a conflict, versus chronic stress? So due to a family issue or something more long-term that's harder to resolve, seeing the latter as good stress is a bit harder.
Yeah. So that's such a good question, because sometimes we're not going to have control of the situation, right? So that's the truth. Maybe somebody within the family has acted poorly for a long period of time, and it really takes some time to kind of recognize what you can control, what you can't control, where to set your boundaries. If you can forgive, you can let go of those grievances. That's kind of longer, deeper psychological work. I think it's extremely important, because those kind of chronic grievances can kind of cause a kind of ongoing stress reaction. So to let go as much as possible is very healthy. And so I think that takes more work, but potentially is more reward than just the sudden frights of, going for your next scan or those type of things. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a great question. And I guess I also am just trying to reiterate that it is going to be tough, and let's just do our best and be kind to ourselves as we're working with whatever situation is coming. We're not going to be perfect in how we respond, but we can continue to learn and grow and get better at whatever, if it's acute or chronic.
And I think this relates to a different question. So how do we deal with constant anxiety or stress that's sometimes in the background? So, sometimes it's level 1, sometimes it's level 8. And how do you manage that if you're worried about cancer recurrence as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the extra, it's like, I'm feeling stressed. That's not good for my immune system. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to, fight off my cancer as well. I'm not going to be able, so it's almost like a paradox of not caring so much in that situation that allows you to get into a more positive state of mind. It's like, because the opposite is being stressed about being stressed, right? And so we have to kind of let go of the outcome in order to get a better outcome. It's the paradox of the remarkable cancer survivor. They don't worry about whether they're going to die or not. They don't have control over that issue. And so forth, they let go of it and they put their energy into things they can control. And remarkably, that actually influences the physical, psychological, spiritual health. Letting go and focusing your energy on things that you can control, right? So it's really like choose, because we can't control it all. Let's choose how we want to focus our energy. What's most important.
Okay, another question. So someone's wondering if prolonged stress is different than elevated levels of occasional stress. So they've been working as a supervisor in a 911 medical control room for 30 years.
Wow.
2 years ago, they were experiencing critical staffing levels to the point where communications were denied some time off. During prolonged minimal staffing levels, is it possible that there is a tipping point? How does perception factor into the scenario?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also, I just want to say, I presented this presentation. It seems kind of clean and dry, become stress hardy by doing these things. When you get a sudden flare of stress, try to settle yourself down, practice a relaxation technique, reframe stress as enhancing, take a spiritual perspective, look at the deeper causes. You can still do all that stuff and still run into really difficult situations that you're describing here and having to go through a period of your life where it's really tough. I would say really the self-compassion piece is super important there. The self-care piece is super important, right? Spending extra time in the activities that nourish your soul is really super important. But there are going to be times when you're going to feel overwhelmed, and that's okay. That's the human experience. And then the reframe around that is that you will get stronger going through that, coming out the other side. So thanks for offering that one, because I just know that can just be so stressful, so difficult.